She wore a torn dress to the interview, then bought the company. The rain hammered against the glass towers of downtown Chicago as Maya Chen stepped out of the taxi, her torn black dress clinging to her soaked frame, the fabric ripped from knee to hem revealing pale skin beneath. She paid the driver with crumpled bills from her purse and walked toward the gleaming entrance of Blackstone Industries, her heels clicking against wet concrete like a countdown to something inevitable. Inside the marble lobby, security guards exchanged glances as she approached, water dripping from her dark hair onto pristine floors, her reflection multiplied in polished surfaces like a broken kaleidoscope. She signed the visitor log with steady hands despite the tremor that had plagued her since that night 3 months ago when everything changed. The elevator climbed 30 floors in silence, each passing number bringing her closer to a confrontation that had been 20 years in the making. Her fingers traced the jagged tear in her dress, remembering another dress, another time, another woman who had worn similar scars. The doors opened with a soft chime and she stepped into the executive floor where her past waited like a predator in expensive suits. James Blackstone sat behind his mahogany desk, silver hair perfectly styled, his eyes the same cold blue she remembered from newspaper clippings and night terrors. He looked up from his papers and froze, recognition dawning across his weathered features like sunrise over a graveyard. The coffee cup in his hand began to shake. "Impossible," he whispered, the word barely audible above the storm raging outside. "You're supposed to be dead." Maya smiled, an expression that never reached her eyes. "Disappointment runs in the family, doesn't it, Dad?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap, 20 years of buried secrets pressing against the walls of his corner office. Family photos on his desk suddenly seemed to mock them both, his legitimate children grinning from silver frames while his greatest shame stood before him in a torn dress and rain-soaked skin. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos behind his eyes. His hands gripped the desk edge until his knuckles turned white. "Money, I suppose. They always want money." Maya reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope, thick with documents and photographs. She placed it on his desk with deliberate care. "I want what you stole from my mother, what you stole from me, what you've been stealing from everyone for decades." His eyes fixed on the envelope like it contained his death sentence, which perhaps it did. The thunder outside seemed to punctuate each moment of their stare down. She could see him calculating, weighing options, searching for escape routes that didn't exist. "Your mother was unstable," he said finally, reaching for the old lies like familiar weapons. "The investigators confirmed it. Suicide by drowning. Case closed 20 years ago." Maya's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Investigators you paid, reports you buried, witnesses who suddenly developed amnesia when checks cleared their bank accounts. But you missed something, Dad. You always were careless with details." She pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it beside the envelope, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. "Forensic accountant named Patricia Morgan, worked for your company in 1999, discovered the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the money laundering operation disguised as charitable foundations." His face went pale as old bone. "Patricia Morgan died in a car accident 3 days before she was supposed to testify to the FBI, Maya continued, her voice gaining strength with each revelation. "Brake lines cut, steering column tampered with, made to look like mechanical failure, except the mechanic who falsified the report kept copies of everything, insurance policy against his own mysterious death." The envelope seemed to grow heavier on his desk, containing evidence that could destroy not just him but half the city's political establishment, bank records showing payments to judges, police commissioners, district attorneys, a web of corruption spanning 2 decades with James Blackstone at its center. "The mechanic died of a heart attack last month," she said, watching his relief begin to bloom, "but not before he mailed everything to his daughter, a journalist at the Chicago Tribune. Funny how children inherit their parents' fights." The relief died on his face, replaced by something darker, more desperate. He opened his desk drawer and she tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead he pulled out a photograph yellow with age, showing a young woman with Maya's eyes and smile. "Your mother loved me," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Whatever else happened, that was real. She wasn't supposed to get pregnant, wasn't supposed to complicate things, but when you were born I thought maybe we could make it work." Maya stared at the photograph, her mother frozen in time, young and hopeful and unaware of the tragedy waiting in her future. You made it work by murdering her when she threatened to expose you. I loved her, he repeated, the words sounding hollow in the vast office. I loved you both, but the business, the investors, everything I'd built would have collapsed. I had responsibilities, obligations to hundreds of employees. You had obligations to your family too, Maya shot back, her composure finally cracking. To the woman who bore your child, to the daughter you abandoned in foster care after faking her death, did those responsibilities mean nothing? The storm outside reached its crescendo, lightning illuminating the office in stark white bursts, casting strange shadows across their faces, father and daughter locked in a battle that transcended business or money or even justice. This was about souls and the prices people pay for power. I searched for you, he said quietly, after the reports came in that you'd died in that fire at the group home. I mourned you, I mourned what we might have been. The fire was convenient, Maya replied, her voice steady again. 17 children died, records destroyed, perfect cover for a girl who needed to disappear, to grow up, to plan her revenge. She stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the storm-ravaged cityscape. I spent 15 years learning everything about you, your business, your weaknesses, your secrets. I became someone you would never suspect, someone who could get close enough to destroy you. He laughed bitterly. You think you can destroy me with some old files, some accusations. I've survived investigations before. I have friends in every courthouse in the state. Maya turned back to him, her smile sharp as a blade. I already have destroyed you, James. The evidence has been in FBI hands for 3 weeks, your assets frozen, your accounts seized, your political friends distancing themselves like you're radioactive. The color drained from his face completely. That's impossible. I would have known, my lawyers would have told me. Your lawyers have been under surveillance, your phones tapped, your emails monitored, she continued relentlessly. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because I asked them to wait. I wanted this moment, this conversation. I wanted to see your face when you realized you'd been checkmated by the daughter you tried to erase. He slumped in his chair like a marionette with cut strings, the weight of 20 years crashing down around him. Outside the storm began to subside, but the real tempest was just beginning, his empire built on blood and lies finally crumbling into dust. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, defeat evident in every syllable. Do you want me to beg, to apologize, to promise things I can never deliver? Maya returned to the desk and picked up the envelope, its contents now irrelevant, the real damage already done through different channels. Now you face justice, real justice, not the kind you've been buying for decades. She headed toward the door, her torn dress still dripping occasionally, each step echoing in the suddenly quiet office. At the doorway she paused and looked back at the broken man behind the desk. Goodbye, Dad. I hope hell is everything you deserve. The elevator descended through floors of unsuspecting employees who would lose their jobs when the indictments came down, innocent people caught in the crossfire of corporate corruption. She felt a momentary pang of guilt but pushed it aside. Justice was rarely clean or simple. In the lobby, FBI agents were already taking positions, discreet but unmistakable in their dark suits and earpieces. Agent Sarah Chen, her adoptive sister, nodded as Maya passed, 20 years of planning finally coming to fruition, 2 orphaned girls who had found each other and forged an unbreakable bond. Outside, the rain had stopped but the streets still gleamed with moisture, reflecting neon signs and headlights like broken promises. Maya walked toward the waiting car where her real family waited, the people who had helped her survive and plan and execute the most elaborate takedown in Chicago's history. 3 months later, she stood in the same office, now hers by right of purchase at the bankruptcy auction, the mahogany desk replaced with something simpler, the family photos gone, replaced by pictures of the 17 children who died in that fire, her friends, her first family, her motivation for everything that followed. The Chicago Tribune headline that morning read, "Corporate Empire Falls to Orphans' Justice," but the real story was more complex, more personal, a daughter's quest to honor her mother's memory and claim her rightful inheritance, not money or property but something more valuable, the truth. James Blackstone died in federal prison 3 weeks into his sentence, officially a heart attack but rumors persisted of suicide or worse. Maya felt nothing when she received the news, no satisfaction, no closure, just emptiness where revenge used to live. She had achieved everything she'd planned but discovered that justice, like love, came with unexpected costs. The company thrived under new management, transformed from a corrupt empire into a legitimate business focused on rebuilding communities rather than exploiting them. The employees who survived the transition discovered they worked better without fear, without the constant pressure of hidden agendas and illegal schemes. Maya kept her mother's photograph on the new desk, a reminder of innocence lost and prices paid. Sometimes late at night she would stare at that young face and wonder what life might have been like if different choices had been made, if love had conquered greed, if family had mattered more than money. The torn dress hung in her closet like a relic, never worn again but never discarded, a symbol of the journey from victim to victor, from powerless child to corporate titan, from Maya the orphan to Maya the avenger, the woman who wore her scars like armor and her pain like fuel. 6 months after the trial ended, she received a letter from an unexpected source, James Blackstone's legitimate daughter Catherine, now estranged from her family name and fortune. The letter was brief, almost formal, but contained an admission that changed everything Maya thought she knew about her father's motivations. "He talked about you constantly," Catherine wrote, especially near the end, not with guilt or regret but with something deeper. "He kept your hospital bracelet from when you were born, carried it in his wallet for 20 years, I found it among his effects and thought you should have it." The tiny plastic bracelet, yellow with age, bore her birth name and weight and the date that marked the beginning of her tragic story, but also something else, handwritten in fading ink, "Daddy's little angel," in her father's careful script, proof that once, however briefly, she had been loved. Maya stared at the bracelet for hours, her careful narrative of pure evil and calculated revenge suddenly complicated by evidence of humanity in the monster she'd destroyed. She had spent 2 decades painting him as irredeemably corrupt, but this small token suggested a more complex truth. The revelation didn't change what he'd done or excuse his crimes, but it added nuance to a story she'd kept deliberately simple. Perhaps he had loved her mother, perhaps he had mourned their deaths, perhaps his descent into corruption had been gradual, each compromise leading to the next until he couldn't find his way back. She placed the bracelet in her office safe next to other mementos, documents that proved her identity, photographs of the group home children, evidence of the crimes that had shaped her life. It joined the collection as both treasure and burden, proof that even the worst people could love, even if they couldn't choose love over power when it mattered most. The city moved on as cities do, new scandals replacing old ones, new corruption growing in the shadows of reform. Maya's story became legend, whispered in business schools and law firms, the orphan who brought down an empire, the daughter who chose justice over family, the woman who proved that sometimes the system could work if you pushed it hard enough. But Maya knew the real truth was messier than the legend. Justice was imperfect, victory was hollow, and revenge was a meal that left you hungrier than before. She had gotten everything she'd wanted and discovered it wasn't enough, would never be enough, because some losses couldn't be balanced by any amount of retribution. Late at night, when the city slept and the office grew quiet, she would sometimes hear her mother's voice in the wind outside the windows, not angry or sad but gentle, forgiving, reminding her that love was stronger than hate, that building was better than destroying, that the best revenge was a life well lived. Maya Chen, formerly Maya Blackstone, formerly a dozen other names and a dozen other identities, finally understood that her real inheritance wasn't money or property or even justice. It was the choice to break the cycle, to build instead of burn, to choose love over vengeance even when vengeance felt easier. The torn dress remained in her closet, a reminder of where she'd been, but increasingly she found herself looking forward instead of back, using her resources to help other orphans, other victims, other forgotten children who needed someone to believe their stories and fight their battles. She had worn a torn dress to an interview and ended up buying the company, but more importantly, she had learned that some victories were measured not in dollars or property but in the lives you touched, the cycles you broke, the hope you kindled in places where darkness had reigned too long. The storm that had raged outside Blackstone Industries that day had passed, but it had washed the city clean, preparing the ground for new growth, new possibilities, new stories of redemption that would be written by those brave enough to believe that tomorrow could be different from yesterday, better than today, worth the struggle it took to build it.